Jewish prayer are the prayer recitations that form part of the observance of Rabbinic Judaism. These prayers, often with instructions and commentary, are found in the siddur, the traditional Jewish prayer book. In general, Jewish men are obligated to pray 3 times a day within specific time ranges, while, according to the Talmud, women are only required to pray once daily, as they are generally exempted from obligations that are time-dependent. Traditionally, 3 prayer services are recited daily: Shatret or Shaharat, from the Hebrew Shadcha or Shahar morning light, Mincha or Minor, the afternoon prayers named for the flour offering that accompanied sacrifices at the temple in Jerusalem, Arvat or Mariv, from nightfall. Additional prayers, Misaf, are recited by Orthodox and conservative congregations on Shabbat, major Jewish holidays, and Rosh Chodesh. A 5th prayer service, tfillah, is recited only on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. According to the Talmud, prayer is a biblical commandment, and the Talmud gives 2 reasons why there are 3 basic prayers: to recall the daily sacrifices at the temple in Jerusalem, and/or because each of the patriarchs instituted 1 prayer: Abraham the morning, Isaac the afternoon and Jacob the evening. A distinction is made between individual prayer and communal prayer, which requires a quorum known as a minyan, with communal prayer being preferable as it permits the inclusion of prayers that otherwise must be omitted. Maimonides relates that until the Babylonian exile, all Jews composed their own prayers, but thereafter the sages of the Great Assembly composed the main portions of the siddur. Modern scholarship dating from the Wissenschaft des Judentums movement of 19th-century Germany, as well as textual analysis influenced by the 20th-century discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, suggests that dating from this period there existed liturgical formulations of a communal nature designated for particular occasions and conducted in a center totally independent of Jerusalem and the Temple, making use of terminology and theological concepts that were later to become dominant in Jewish and, in some cases, Christian prayer. The language of the prayers, while clearly from the Second Temple period, often employs biblical idiom. Jewish prayer books emerged during the early Middle Ages during the period of the Geonim of Babylonia. Over the last 2,000 years, variations have emerged among the traditional liturgical customs of different Jewish communities, such as Ashkenazic, Sephardic, Yemenite, Hasidic, and others. However, the differences are minor compared with the commonalities. Most of the Jewish liturgy is sung or chanted with traditional melodies or trope. Synagogues may designate or employ a professional or lay hazan for the purpose of leading the congregation in prayer, especially on Shabbat or holidays. Origin and history of Jewish prayer. Biblical origin. According to the oral Torah, prayer is a biblical command: you shall serve God with your whole heart. What service is performed with the heart? This is prayer. The prayers are therefore referred to as avodah shebelev. The noted Rabbi Maimonides likewise categorizes prayer as a biblical command of written law, but believed that the number of prayers in their times are not. The oral law gives 2 reasons why there are 3 basic prayers. Each service was instituted parallel to a sacrificial act in the temple in Jerusalem: the morning tamid offering, the afternoon tamid, and the overnight burning of this last offering. According to Rabbi Jose B. Hanina, each of the patriarchs instituted 1 prayer: Abraham the morning, Isaac the afternoon and Jacob the evening prayers. This view is supported with biblical quotes indicating that the patriarchs prayed at the times mentioned. However, even according to this view, the exact times of when the services are held, and moreover the entire concept of a musaf service, are still based on the sacrifices. Additional references in the Hebrew Bible have been interpreted to suggest that King David and the prophet Daniel prayed 3 times a day. In Psalms, David states, "Evening, morning, and noontime, I speak and moan, and he hearkened to my voice." Psalm 55:18. As in the book of Daniel. And Daniel, when he knew that a writ had been inscribed, came to his house, where there were open windows in his upper chamber, opposite Jerusalem, and 3 times a day he kneeled on his knees and prayed and offered thanks before his God just as he had done prior to this. Daniel 6:11. Orthodox, Modern Orthodox and Sephardic strands of observant Judaism regard halakha as requiring Jewish men to pray 3 times daily and 4 times daily on the Sabbath and most Jewish holidays, and 5 times on Yom Kippur. Some observant Jewish women regard the system of multiple daily prayer services as optional for them due to a need to be constantly taking care of small children, but in accordance with halakha still pray at least daily, without a specific time requirement. Moreover, it is generally accepted by observant that is Orthodox, Modern Orthodox and Sephardic religious authorities that women are exempt from the evening prayer. The conservative branch of Reform Judaism does not regard halakha as binding. However, it recommends the halakhic system of multiple daily services as mandatory. Since 2002, Jewish women from conservative Reform congregations have been regarded as having undertaken a communal obligation to pray the same prayers at the same times as men, with traditional communities and individual women permitted to opt out. Reform and Reconstructionist congregations do not regard halakha as binding and hence regard appropriate prayer times as matters of personal spiritual decision rather than a matter of religious requirement. Text and language. According to halakha, all individual prayers and virtually all communal prayers may be said in any language that the person praying understands. For example, the Mishnah mentions that the Shema need not be said in Hebrew. A list of prayers that must be said in Hebrew is given in the Mishnah, and among these only the priestly blessing is in use today, as the others are prayers that are to be said only in a temple in Jerusalem, by a priest, or by a reigning king. Despite this, the tradition of most Ashkenazi Orthodox synagogues is to use Hebrew for all except a small number of prayers, including the Kaddish, which had always been in Aramaic, and sermons and instructions, for which the local language is used. In other streams of Judaism there is considerable variability. Sephardic communities may use Ladino or Portuguese for many prayers. Conservative synagogues tend to use the local language to a varying degree. And at some Reform synagogues almost the whole service may be in the local language. Maimonides relates that until the Babylonian exile, all Jews composed their own prayers. After the exile, however, the sages of the time found the ability of the people insufficient to continue the practice, and they composed the main portions of the siddur, such as the Amidah. The origins of modern Jewish prayer were established during the period of the Tannaim. From their traditions, later committed to writing, we learn that the generation of rabbis active at the time of the destruction of the Second Temple gave Jewish prayer its structure and, in outline form at least, its contents. This liturgy included the twice-daily recitation of the Shema, the Amidah, or Shmini Esrei, including 18 blessings recited several times daily, and the public recitation of the Torah in installments. The oldest prayer books date from the time of the Geonim of Babylonia. Some were composed by respected rabbinic scholars at the request of far-flung communities seeking an authoritative text of the required prayers for daily use, Shabbat, and holidays. The language of the prayers, while clearly being from the Second Temple period, often employs biblical idiom, and according to some authorities it should not contain rabbinic or Mishnaic idiom apart from in the sections of Mishnah that are featured. Over the last 2,000 years, the various branches of Judaism have resulted in small variations in the rabbinic liturgy customs among different Jewish communities, with each community having a slightly different nusach. The principal differences between Ashkenazic and Sephardic customs, although there are other communities, and Hasidic and other communities also have distinct customs, variations, and special prayers. The differences are quite minor compared with the commonalities. The siddur. The earliest parts of Jewish prayer are the Shema Yisrael, and the priestly blessing, which are in the Torah. A set of 18 blessings called the Shemini Esrei or the Amidah, is traditionally ascribed to the Great Assembly in the time of Ezra, at the end of the biblical period. The name Shemini Esrei, literally 18, is an historical anachronism, since it now contains 19 blessings. It was only near the end of the Second Temple period that the 18 prayers of the weekday Amidah became standardized. Even at the time their precise wording and order was not yet fixed, and varied from locale to locale. It was not until several centuries later that the prayers began to be formally fixed. By the Middle Ages the texts of the prayers were nearly fixed, and in the form in which they're still used today. The siddur was printed by Cincino in Italy as early as 1486, though a siddur was first mass-distributed only in 1865. The siddur began appearing in the vernacular as early as 1538. The first English translation, by Gamaliel ben Petarza, appeared in London in 1738. A different translation was released in the United States in 1837. Readings from the Torah and the Nevi'im form part of the prayer services. To this framework various Jewish sages added, from time to time, various prayers, and, for festivals especially, numerous hymns. The earliest existing codification of the prayer book was drawn up by Rav Amram Gaon of Shura, Babylon, about 850 CE. Half a century later Rav Saadia Gaon, also of Shura, composed a siddur, in which the rubrical matter is in Arabic. These were the basis of Simchor ben Samuel's Mishnah Vitri, which was based on the ideas of his teacher, Rashi. Another formulation of the prayers was that appended by Maimonides to the laws of prayer in his Mishnah Torah. This forms the basis of the Yemenite liturgy, and has had some influence on other rites. From this point forward all Jewish prayer books had the same basic order and contents. Denominational variations. Conservative services generally use the same basic format for services as in Orthodox Judaism, with some doctrinal leniencies and some prayers in English. In practice there is wide variation among conservative congregations. In traditionalist congregations the liturgy can be almost identical to that of Orthodox Judaism, almost entirely in Hebrew, with a few minor exceptions, including excision of a study session on temple sacrifices, and modifications of prayers for the restoration of the sacrificial system. In more liberal conservative synagogues there are greater changes to the service, with up to a third of the service in English. Abbreviation or omission of many of the preparatory prayers, and replacement of some traditional prayers with more contemporary forms. There are some changes for doctrinal reasons, including egalitarian language, fewer references to restoring sacrifices in the temple in Jerusalem, and an option to eliminate special roles for Kohanim and Levites. The liturgies of Reform and Reconstructionist are based on traditional elements, but contains language more reflective of liberal belief than the traditional liturgy. Doctrinal revisions generally include revising or omitting references to traditional doctrines such as bodily resurrection, a personal Jewish Messiah, and other elements of traditional Jewish eschatology, divine revelation of the Torah at Mount Sinai, angels, conceptions of reward and punishment, and other personal miraculous and supernatural elements. Services are often from 40% to 90% in the vernacular. Reform Judaism has made greater alterations to the traditional service in accord with its more liberal theology, including dropping references to traditional elements of Jewish eschatology such as a personal Messiah, a bodily resurrection of the dead, and others. The Hebrew portion of the service is substantially abbreviated and modernized, and modern prayers substituted for traditional ones. In addition, in keeping with their view that the laws of Shabbat are inapplicable to modern circumstances, Reform services often play instrumental or recorded music with prayers on the Jewish Sabbath. All Reform synagogues are egalitarian with respect to gender roles. Philosophy of prayer. In Jewish philosophy and in rabbinic literature, it is noted that the Hebrew verb for prayer hait palalei is in fact the reflexive form of palalei, to judge. Thus, to pray conveys the notion of judging oneself ultimately. The purpose of prayer tfile is to transform ourselves. This etymology is consistent with the Jewish conception of divine simplicity. It is not God that changes through our prayer man does not influence God as a defendant influences a human judge who has emotions and is subject to change rather it is man himself who is changed. It is further consistent with Maimonides' view on divine providence. Here, tfillah is the medium which God gave to man by means of which he can change himself, and thereby establish a new relationship with God and thus a new destiny for himself in life. See also under Psalms. The rationalist approach, in this view, ultimate goal of prayer is to help train a person to focus on divinity through philosophy and intellectual contemplation. This approach was taken by Maimonides and the other medieval rationalists. The educational approach: in this view, prayer is not a conversation. Rather, it is meant to inculcate certain attitudes in the one who prays, but not to influence. This has been the approach of Rabbeinu Bachya, Yehuda Halevi, Joseph Albo, Samson Raphael Hirsch, and Joseph Dov Soloveitchik. This view is expressed by Rabbi Nosson Sherman in the overview to the Art Scroll Siddur. Note that Sherman goes on to also affirm the Kabbalistic view. Kabbalistic view: Kabbalah uses a series of kavanot, directions of intent, to specify the path the prayer ascends in the dialogue with God, to increase its chances of being answered favorably. Kabbalism ascribes a higher meaning to the purpose of prayer, which is no less than affecting the very fabric of reality itself, restructuring and repairing the universe in a real fashion. In this view, every word of every prayer, and indeed, even every letter of every word, has a precise meaning and a precise effect. Prayers thus literally affect the mystical forces of the universe, and repair the fabric of creation. This approach has been taken by the Chassidai Ashkenaz, the Zohar, the Arizal's Kabbalist tradition, the Ramchal, most of Hasidism, the Vilna Gaon and Jacob Emden. Methodology and terminology: terms for praying. Daven is the originally exclusively Eastern Yiddish verb meaning pray. It is widely used by Ashkenazic Orthodox Jews. In Yinglish, this has become the anglicized davening. The origin of the word is obscure, but is thought by some to have come from Arabic, French, Latin or even English. Others believe that it derives from a Slavic word meaning to give. Some claim that it originates from an Aramaic word, daven, or davenun, meaning of there are forefathers, as the three prayers are said to have been invented by Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. Another Aramaic derivation, proposed by Avig Chaikin, cites the Armudic phrase, Kardavela Mizrach, gazing wistfully to the east. Kevin A. Brook, cites Zidon's suggestion that the word daven comes from Turkish root taban meaning to pray, and that in Kipchak Turkish, the initial T morphs into D. In Western Yiddish, the term for pray is oran, a word with clear roots in Romance languages. Euro compare Spanish and Portuguese ora and Latin era. Minyan. Individual prayer is considered acceptable, but prayer with a quorum of 10 adults a minyan is the most highly recommended form of prayer and is required for some prayers. An adult in this context means over the age of 13. Judaism had originally counted only men in the minyan for formal prayer, on the basis that one does not count someone who is not obligated to participate. The rabbis had exempted women from almost all time-specific positive mitzvot, including those parts of the prayer that cannot be recited without a quorum, due to women in the past being bound up in an endless cycle of pregnancy, birthing and nursing from a very early age. Orthodox Judaism still follows this reasoning and excludes women from the minyan. Since 1973, conservative congregations have overwhelmingly become egalitarian and count women in the minyan. Today quite a few conservative congregations even feature female rabbis and cantors. A very small number of congregations that identify themselves as conservative have resisted these changes and continue to exclude women from the minyan. Those Reform and Reconstructionist congregations that consider a minyan mandatory for communal prayer, count both men and women for a minyan. In Orthodox Judaism, according to some authorities, women can count in the minyan for certain specific prayers, such as the Birkat HaGomel blessing, which both men and women are obligated to say publicly. Various sources encourage a congregant to pray in a fixed place in the synagogue. Attire, head covering. In most synagogues, it is considered a sign of respect for male attendees to wear a head covering, either a dress hat or a kippah. It is common practice for both Jews and non-Jews who attend a synagogue to wear a head covering. Some conservative synagogues may also encourage women to cover their heads. Many Reform and Progressive temples do not require people to cover their heads, although individual worshippers, both men and women, may choose to. Many Orthodox and some conservative men and women wear a head covering throughout their day, even when not attending religious services. Talit is traditionally worn during all morning services, during Aliyah to the Torah, as well as during all the services of Yom Kippur. During the daily afternoon and evening services, the Hazan alone wears a talit. In Orthodox synagogues they are expected to be worn only by men who are halakhically Jewish, and in conservative synagogues they should be worn only by men and women who are halakhically Jewish. In most Orthodox Ashkenazi synagogues they are worn only by men who or have been married. Tefillin are a set of small cubic leather boxes painted black, containing scrolls of parchment inscribed with verses from the Torah. They are tied to the head and arm with leather straps dyed black, and worn only by Jews, during weekday morning prayers. In Orthodox synagogues they are expected to be worn only by men. In conservative synagogues they are also worn by some women. Zenat applies to men and women. When attending Orthodox synagogues, women will likely be expected to wear long sleeves, long skirts, a high neckline, and if married, to cover their hair with a wig, scarf, hat or a combination of the above. For men, short pants or sleeveless shirts are generally regarded as inappropriate. In some conservative and reformed synagogues the dress code may be more lax, but still respectful. Daily prayers, Shatrit. The Shatrit prayer is recited in the morning. Halakha limits parts of its recitation to the first 3 or 4 hours of the day, where hours are 1/12 of daylight time, making these times dependent on the season. Various prayers are said upon arising. The talit katan is donned at this time. The talit is donned before or during the actual prayer service, as are the tefillin. Both are accompanied by blessings. The service starts with the morning blessings, including blessings for the Torah. In Orthodox services this is followed by a series of readings from biblical and rabbinic writings recalling the offerings made in the temple in Jerusalem. The section concludes with the rabbi's Kaddish. The next section of morning prayers is called Pesukei Zimra, containing several psalms, and prayers made from a tapestry of biblical verses, followed by the Song at the Sea. Beru, the formal public call to prayer, introduces a series of expanded blessings embracing the recitation of the Shema. This is followed by the core of the prayer service, the Amidah or Shemini Esrei, a series of 19 blessings. The next part of the service is Takanun, supplications, which is omitted on days with a festive character. On Mondays and Thursdays a Torah reading service is inserted, and a longer version of Takanun takes place. Concluding prayers and Aliyanu then follow, with the Kaddish of the mourners generally after Aliyanu. Mincha. Mincha or Minor may be recited from half an hour after halakhic noon time. This earliest time is referred to as Mincha Jedla. There is, however, another time to daven Mincha, which is then known as Mincha Katerna. Ideally, one should complete the prayers before sunset, although many authorities permit reciting Mincha until nightfall. Mincha is allowed to be recited during any of the hours between Mincha Jedla and Mincha Katerna also. Sephardim and Italian Jews start the Mincha prayers with Psalm 84 and Korbanot, and usually continue with the Pitum HaKeteret. The opening section is concluded with Malachi 3:4. Western Ashkenazim recite the Korbanot only. Ashrai, containing verses from Psalms 84:5, 144:15 and the entire Psalm 145, is recited, immediately followed by Chatzi Kaddish and the Shemini Esrei. This is followed by Takanun, supplications, and then the full Kaddish. Sephardim insert Psalm 67 or 93, followed by the mourner's Kaddish. After this follows, in most modern rites, the Aliyanu. Ashkenazim then conclude with the mourner's Kaddish. Service leaders often wear a talit even on normal days, and must wear one during the fast days. Revavit. In many congregations, the afternoon and evening prayers are recited back-to-back on a working day, to save people having to attend synagogue twice. The Vilna Gaon discouraged this practice, and followers of his set of customs commonly wait until after nightfall to recite Maariv. This service begins with the Beru, the formal public call to prayer, and Shema Israel embraced by 2 benedictions before and 2 after. Ashkenazim outside of Israel then add another blessing, which is made from a tapestry of biblical verses. This is followed by the half Kaddish, and the Shemini Esrei, bracketed with the full Kaddish. Sephardim then say Psalm 121, say the mourner's Kaddish, and repeat Beru before concluding with the Aliyanu. Ashkenazim, in the diaspora, do neither say Psalm 121 nor repeat Beru, but conclude with Aliyanu followed by the mourner's Kaddish. Prayer on Shabbat, on the Sabbath. Prayers are similar in structure to those on weekdays, although almost every part is lengthened. One exception in the Amidah, the main prayer, which is abridged. The first 3 and last 3 blessings are recited as usual, but the middle 13 are replaced with a single blessing known as Sanctity of the Day, describing the Sabbath. Atypically, this middle blessing is different for each of the prayers. Friday night, Shabbat services begin on Friday evening with the weekday mincha, followed in some communities by the Song of Songs, and then in most communities by the Kabbalat Shabbat, the mystical prelude to Shabbat services composed by 16th-century Kabbalists. This Hebrew term literally means receiving the Sabbath. In many communities, the Piyut Yudid Nefesh introduces the Kabbalat Shabbat prayers. Kabbalat Shabbat is, except for amongst many Italian and Spanish and Portuguese Jews, composed of 6 psalms, 95 to 99, and 29, representing the 6 weekdays. Next comes the poem Lech Hadodi. Composed by Rabbi Shlomo Halevi Alkabetz in the mid-16th century, it is based on the words of the Talmudic sage Hananah, "Come, let us go out to meet the Queen's Sabbath." Kabbalat Shabbat is concluded by Psalm 92 and Psalm 93. Many add a study section here, including B'mi Madlikin and Amar Rabbi Elazar and the concluding Kaddish de Rabbanan, and is then followed by the Mariv service. Other communities delay the study session until after Mariv. Still other customs add here a passage from the Zohar. The Shema section of the Friday night service varies in some details from the weekday service, mainly in the different ending of the Hashkivanu prayer and the omission of Baruch Adonai Le'olam prayer in those traditions where this section is otherwise recited. In the Italian rite, there are also different versions of the Ma'ariv Arevim prayer and the Ahavat Olam prayer. Most commemorate the Shabbat at this point with the Ishamaru. The custom to recite the biblical passage at this point has its origins in the Lurianic Kabbalah, and does not appear before the 16th century. It is therefore absent in traditions and prayer books less influenced by the Kabbalah, or those that opposed adding additional readings to the siddur based upon the Kabbalah. The middle blessing of the Amidah discusses the conclusion of the creation, quoting the relevant verses from Genesis. This is then followed by the Hassan's mini repetition of the Amidah, Majanavt, a digest of the 7 benedictions. In some Ashkenazi Orthodox synagogues the second chapter of Mishnah tractate Shabbat, B'mi Madlikin, is read at this point, instead of earlier. Kiddush is recited in the synagogue in Ashkenazi and a few Sephardi communities. The service then follows with Aliyanu. Most Sephardi and many Ashkenazi synagogues end with the singing of Yigdal, a poetic adaptation of Maimonides' 13 Principles of Jewish Faith. Other Ashkenazi synagogues end with Adon Olam instead. Shatrat, Shabbat morning prayers commences on weekdays. Of the hymns, Psalm 100, is omitted because the Todah or thanksgiving offering could not be offered on Shabbat in the days of the Temple in Jerusalem. Its place is taken in the Ashkenazi tradition by Psalms 19, 34, 90, 91, 135, 136, 33, 92, 93. Sephardic Jews maintain a different order, add several psalms and 2 religious poems. The Nishmat prayer is recited at the end of the Pesukei Zimra. The blessings before Shema are expanded, and include the hymn El Adon, which is often sung communally. The intermediary benediction of the Shatrat Amidah begins with Yismak Moshe and discusses Moses' receiving of the Torah. Kedosha, which is always recited during the Hassan's repetition of the third blessing, is significantly expanded. After the repetition is concluded, the Torah scroll is taken out of the ark in a ritual much longer than the ritual during the week, and the weekly portion is read, followed by the Haftorah. After the Torah reading, 3 prayers for the community are recited. 2 prayers starting with Yekem Perkan, composed in Babylon and Aramaic, are similar to the subsequent Mishibrak, a blessing for the leaders and patrons of the synagogue. The Sephardim omit much of the Yekem Perkan. Prayers are then recited for the government of the country, for peace, and for the State of Israel. After these prayers, Ashrei is repeated and the Torah scroll is returned to the ark in a procession through the synagogue. Many congregations allow children to come to the front in order to kiss the scroll as it passes. In many Orthodox communities, the rabbi delivers a sermon at this point, usually on the topic of the Torah reading. Musaf. The Musaf service starts with the silent recitation of the Amidah. The middle blessing includes the Taikan to Shabbat reading on the holiness of Shabbat, and then by a reading from the biblical book of Numbers about the sacrifices that used to be performed in the temple in Jerusalem. Next comes Ayizmishu, they shall rejoice in your sovereignty, and Lohinu, our God and God of our ancestors, may you be pleased with our rest, which is recited during all Amidahs of the Sabbath. Kedusha is greatly expanded. After the Amidah comes the full Kaddish, followed by Ein Klohinu. In Orthodox Judaism this is followed by a reading from the Talmud on the incense offering called Pittum HaKetoreth and daily psalms that used to be recited in the temple in Jerusalem. These readings are usually omitted by conservative Jews, and are always omitted by Reform Jews. The Musaf service culminates with the Rabbi's Kaddish, the Aliyanu, and then the Mourner's Kaddish. Some synagogues conclude with the reading of Anaim Zemaret, the Hymn of Glory, Mourner's Kaddish, the Psalm of the Day and either Eid or Nolam or Yigdal. Mincha commences with Ashrei in the prayer Uvaletzion, after which the first section of the next weekly portion is read from the Torah scroll. The Amidah follows the same pattern as the other Shabbat Amidah prayers, with the middle blessing starting at Tarikot. Moriv, the weekday Moriv is recited on the evening immediately following Shabbat, concluding with V'hinam, Ve'yitan Lekha, and Avdallah. Special observances and circumstances, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the services for the days of Aweh Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur take on a solemn tone as befits these days. Traditional solemn tunes are used in the prayers. The Musaf service on Rosh Hashanah has 9 blessings. The 3 middle blessings include biblical verses attesting to sovereignty, remembrance and the shofar, which is sounded 100 times during the service. Yom Kippur is the only day in the year when there are 5 prayer services. The evening service, containing the Moriv prayer, is widely known as Kol Nidre, the opening declaration made preceding the prayer. During the daytime, Shatrat, Musaf and Mincha are followed, as the sun begins to set, by Nila, which is recited just this once a year. Pesach, Shavuot and Sukkot, the services for the 3 festivals of Pesach, Shavuot, and Sukkot are alike, except for interpolated references and readings for each individual festival. The preliminaries and conclusions of the prayers are the same as on Shabbat. The Amidah on these festivals only contains 7 benedictions, with the Tabbat Shatenu as the main one. Hillel follows. The Musaf service includes Yumi Pinai Hatenu, with reference to the special festival and temple sacrifices on the occasion. A blessing on the pulpit is pronounced by the Kohanim during the Amidah. While this occurs daily in Israel and most Sephardic congregations, it occurs only on Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur in Ashkenazic congregations of the diaspora prayer, on weekdays and Sabbath in commemoration of the priestly blessing. Missed prayer: in the event one of the prayers was missed inadvertently, the Amidah prayer is said twice in the next service, a procedure known as tefillah tashlumin. Related customs: many Jews sway their body back and forth during prayer. This practice is not mandatory, and in fact the Kabbalist Isaac Luria felt that it should not be done. In contrast, the German medieval authority Maharil linked the practice to a statement in the Talmud that the Mishnaic sage Rabbi Akiva would sway so forcefully that he ended up at the other side of the room when praying. Many are accustomed to giving charity before, during or after prayer, in the hopes that this will make their prayer more likely to be heard. Role of women: men are obligated to perform public prayer 3 times a day with additional services on Jewish holidays. According to Jewish law, each prayer must be performed within specific time ranges, based on the time that the communal sacrifice the prayer is named after would have been performed in the days of the temple in Jerusalem. According to the Talmud, women are generally exempted from obligations that have to be performed at a certain time. Orthodox authorities have generally interpreted this exemption due to women's higher spiritual level and therefore a lack of need to connect to God at specific times, since they are always connected to God. In accordance with the general exemption from time-bound obligations, most Orthodox authorities have exempted women from performing evening prayers, but most believe that women are obligated to pray Shatrit and Mincha, the morning and afternoon prayers, respectively, when possible. Orthodox authorities have been careful to note that although some women with small children have been exempted from praying at specific fixed times, they are not exempted from the obligation of prayer itself. The 19th-century Pesach Yechiel Michel Epstein, author of the Erech HaShulchan, notes, even though the rabbis set prayer at fixed times in fixed language, it was not their intention to issue a leniency and exempt women from this ritual act. Authorities have disagreed on the minimum amount that women's prayer should contain. Many Jewish women have relied on an idea expressed by Ashkenazi Rabbi Avraham Gombiner in his Magen Avraham commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and more recently the Rabbi Ovadia Yosef, that women are only required to pray once a day, in any form they choose, so long as the prayer contains praise of, requests to, and thanks of God. However, most Orthodox authorities agree that women are not completely exempt from time-bound prayer. The Mishnah Berurah by Rabbi Israel Mukagan, an important code of Ashkenazic Jewish law, holds that the men of the Great Assembly obligated women to say Shatrit and Mincha prayer services each day, just like men. The Mishnah Berurah also states that although women are exempt from reciting the Shema Israel, they should nevertheless say it anyway. Nonetheless, even the most liberal Orthodox authorities hold that women cannot count in a minyan for purposes of public prayer. Throughout Orthodox Judaism, including its most liberal forms, men and women are required to sit in separate sections with a mekitzah separating them. Conservative Masorti Judaism permits mixed seating. All Reform and Reconstructionist congregations have mixed seating. Haredi and much of modern Orthodox Judaism has a blanket prohibition on women leading public congregational prayers. Conservative Judaism has developed a blanket justification for women leading all or virtually all such prayers, holding that although only obligated individuals can lead prayers and women were not traditionally obligated, conservative Jewish women in modern times have as a collective whole voluntarily undertaken such an obligation. Reform and Reconstructionist congregations permit women to perform all prayer roles because they do not regard halakha as binding. A small liberal wing within modern Orthodox Judaism, particularly rabbis friendly to the Jewish Orthodox Feminist Alliance, has begun re-examining the role of women in prayers based on an individual, case-by-case look at the historical role of specific prayers and services, doing so within classical halakhic interpretation. Accepting that where obligation exists only the obligated can lead, this small group has typically made three general arguments for expanded women's roles. Because women were required to perform certain korbanot in the temple in Jerusalem, women today are required to perform, and hence can lead, the specific prayers substituting for these specific sacrifices. Birshat Hagamal falls in this category. Because certain parts of the service were added after the Talmud defined mandatory services, such prayers are equally voluntary on everyone and hence can be led by women. Sukad Zimra in the morning and Kabbalat Shabbat on Friday nights fall in this category. In cases where the Talmud indicates that women are generally qualified to lead certain services but do not do so because of the dignity of the congregation, modern congregations are permitted to waive such dignity if they wish. Torah reading on Shabbat falls in this category. An argument that women are permitted to lead the services removing and replacing the Torah in the Ark on Shabbat extends from their ability to participate in Torah reading then. A very small number of modern Orthodox congregations accept some such arguments, but very few Orthodox congregations or authorities accept all or even most of them. Many of those who do not accept this reasoning point to Kol Isha, the tradition that prohibits a man from hearing a woman other than his wife or close blood relative sing. JOFA refers to congregations generally accepting such arguments as partnership minyanim. On Shabbat in a partnership minyan, women can typically lead Kabbalat Shabbat, the Sukad Zimra, the services for removing the Torah from and replacing it to the Ark, and Torah reading, as well as give the Torah or sermon. The first Orthodox Jewish women's prayer group was created on the holiday of Simchat Torah at Lincoln Square Synagogue in Manhattan in the late 1960s. Ephraim Mervis, an Orthodox rabbi who serves as the chief rabbi of the United Hebrew Congregations of the Commonwealth, supports Shabbat prayer groups for Orthodox women, saying, "Some of our congregations have women prayer groups for Friday night, some Saturday mornings. This is without women reading from the Torah. But for women to come together as a group to pray, this is a good thing." Role of minors. In most divisions of Judaism, boys prior to bar mitzvah cannot act as a chazan for prayer services that contain devarim sheb kedusha, that is Kaddish, Beru, the Amda, etc., or receive an aliyah or chant the Torah for the congregation. Since Kabbalat Shabbat is just psalms and does not contain devarim sheb kedusha, it is possible for a boy under bar mitzvah to lead until Beru of Merav. Some Eastern Jews let a boy under bar mitzvah read the Torah and have an aliyah. See also, List of Jewish prayers and blessings, Siddur, Shiva, Shuckling, Kalib Minyan, Baladi Rite Prayer, References, Notes. Bibliography, To Pray as a Jew, Chaim Halavi Donin, Basic Books, Entering Jewish Prayer, Reuven Hammer, Kai Vanner, Directing the Heart in Jewish Prayer, Seth Kaddish, Jason Aronson Incorporated 1997. ISBN 0-7657-5952-7. Or Hadash, A Commentary on Siddur Sim Shalom for Shabbat and Festivals, Reuven Hammer, The Rabbinical Assembly and the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism Esber. Siddur Avodat Israel, 19th century. A Guide to Jewish Prayer, Rabbi Adin Steinsaltz, Shochan Books, Hilchot tefillah, A Comprehensive Guide to the Laws of Daily Prayer, David Brofsky, KTAV Publishing House OU Press Yeshivat Har-Ezion. 2010. God's Favorite Prayers, TZVE Zehavi, Armudic Books. 2011. Holistic Prayer, A Guide to Jewish Spirituality, Rabbi Avi Weiss, Magid Books. 2014. External links, Jewish Liturgy JewishVirtualLibrary.org, Jewish Prayer, Prayer in Judaism Shabbat.org, Outline of Prayer Services JewFact.org, GoDaven.com, the Worldwide Minyan Database GoDaven.com, Introduction to Jewish Prayer Esh.com, Ritual for Judging Bad Dreams for Good, Siddur in PDF, Traditional Sephardi Prayer Tunes, Audio and Text of the Siddur SiddurAudio.com, Q&A about Prayer Ask the Rabbi, Rabbi Eliezer Malamed, Penenu Halacha, The Laws of Prayer.